everyone, welcome back to WCB Jazz Vinyl. So I wanted to make a reaction video to having a new turntable set up now for just about a week. Now keep in mind, it has only been 1 week, right? And cartridges need time to break in. And in this case I have 2, which basically that means that I need like double the time for them to break in. But still, it's been a week. I'm due for a video and I couldn't really be expected to do like a shootout of new releases or something, because again, like the cartridge only has a couple of hours of playing time. It wouldn't really be fair in terms of me even being able to assess how anything sounds, honestly. So what I'm going to address in this video is reactions to this turntable, in terms of my opinion, just a weekend, and give you some more information about what the turntable is and I guess some of the things that I've noticed thus far. So before we dive into some of those topics, as always, hit like, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell so you get notified every time I have something to say about this turntable. And go ahead and head over to Instagram. You can follow me at what_can_brown. All right, so last week I informed everyone about my new turntable purchase. And that is the Luxman PD-151 Mk II, which you can see right beside me. Now, not everyone was happy with this decision, and I knew that that would be the case. Now, there was a little bit of, unconstructive or non-constructive feedback, but the funny thing is that everyone has an opinion that they're so steadfast in, and these opinions are so different, which is just, from my perspective, it's a little bit comical because it's like everybody's shouting, but shouting something different. And so it's, in any event, I'm rolling with the punches on this one, but actually since posting my last video, I've also been surprised at how many Luxman fans have come out of the woodwork to tell me that they too have a Luxman table and love it, because I didn't realize, I guess, how pervasive that brand was here in the US. And it seems like there's more people who have a table or have an amplifier. Typically somebody who has an amplifier might actually have both the table and the amplifier. But the general consensus is that they absolutely love the brand. And so, that's a little bit of positive reinforcement that I think I needed, by the way, after spending so much money on this, and to have everybody in the comments tell me I did it wrong. So anyway, I'm happy with my decision, and so that's what's most important. So the Luxman PD-151 Mk II turntable. Well, this is a Japanese brand. Luxman is a Japanese brand, at least traditionally, and they've been around since like 1925. They started out, get this, as a radio equipment department of a picture frame store in Osaka. And, in some ways it kind of reminds me of, and maybe this is common knowledge or maybe it isn't, but like Bass Beer Company eventually became IHG Hotels, which owns like Holiday Inn, except there's still Bass Beer. So anyway, it's just kind of interesting to see how some of these brands sort of travel and pivot, right, over time. Anyway, as Luxman grew over time, I would say they probably became best known for their tube amplifiers, and they may still be mostly known for their amplifiers today, even more so than their turntables. I think they first expanded into the North American market in 1972, so perhaps they were a little bit of a late entrant compared to some of the other American and European brands. Luxman ended up being sold to a Chinese holding company called International Audio Group in 2009. It's the same holding company that owns Wharfdale, as well as like Audiolab, Quad, and I think there's some others. And I do believe that that's still the parent company. However, I also believe that Luxman continues to manufacture in Japan. And despite the fact that they are sort of owned by this large company, that they basically operate independently, but I could be wrong with some of those details. So how I came to Luxman, I addressed this right in the last video, and I talked about some of my key considerations, and that's really what drove me to it. But I got to be honest, when I initially did my research, Luxman didn't even show up. It wasn't even something that I had been considering. So let me kind of explain how this happened. One of the biggest reasons, honestly, is the price point, because when I started this turntable journey, I thought I could get everything that I wanted by spending somewhere around like $3,000, maybe $4,000. So I was looking at tables that cost that or less. Well, also as part of my process, I visited a local hi-fi shop. Because personally, I mean, here's the thing. I know that a lot of you out there, especially who have had your heads in the equipment game for, a long time, you probably are very familiar with a variety of manufacturers of probably all the components, right? Because you've upgraded your systems over time, and you even prioritize, you know, testing and swapping and like doing all that kind of stuff. But as I established in the second video that I ever made on this platform, I am a vinyl person more than an equipment person, right? So I don't have that experience. I've been through a couple of turntables, a couple of amplifiers, but I'm a little bit more of the sort that just wants something that does the job that it's supposed to do so that I don't have to think about it anymore. I don't sit and listen to music. Despite maybe how some of my reviews sound, I don't focus on things that I think I might be missing with my equipment setup. That's not what I do. I typically just kind of zone in on the music and try to enjoy it. So one of the things that I did is I visited a local hi-fi shop here in Atlanta for help, and that hi-fi shop is called HiFi Buys. So I want to say at some point actually that they had a number of locations, possibly in different states, but they sort of consolidated, I think, just down to the one at some point. This is actually the very same shop that I took my copy of John Coltrane's The Love Supreme Super Sense Master Cut Edition in order to hear it on their $500,000 setup. Like, I had this expensive record that I bought, and I wanted to hear it on a system that was better than mine because I didn't think that I was really getting the most out of it. And so I took it there, and it was amazing. Well, HiFi also sold me my Kef LS-50 speakers, my Kef KC-62 amplifier, and even my VPI vacuum cleaning machine. So it's a shop that I'm familiar with, and I even have a friend of over 10 years that works there. In fact, I've known him since like well before he worked there, so I trust his advice. Incidentally, I've been mentioning some of my gear. If you want to see the list of gear that I have just holistically in this room, I'll put it in the description so you can check that out. So I posed my problem, or really my considerations or my must-haves, right, with a turntable to HiFi Buys. You know, dual head shell, and you know, wanting to play mono and stereo and the whole thing. And I simultaneously had them looking into options on my behalf at the same time that I was looking into options. And so one of the reasons I think that it took me so long to pull the trigger on a turntable was both because I wanted to make sure I was doing enough research without overlooking anything, and obviously offloading a little bit of that research to HiFi Buys. And obviously at the same time, I was also selling records on eBay to fund the purchase. I've talked about this in prior videos. If you haven't watched some of my recent videos, where I go into this in a little bit more depth. Basically, I have somewhere around 3,600 records in my collection. A good 400 of them, 400 I think plus, had been sitting in a closet, either because they were duplicates or they were because they were records that I played like one or two times. And I decided immediately, you know what, it's not going to be enough for me, whether it was because of the condition or whether it was because simply the music, I just didn't want to shelve it. And so I put it away, like out of sight, out of mind, into a closet. And so, you know, I wanted to not only like sell those 400, I wanted to go through the process of doing that and sort of be hard on myself to be like, no, you have to sell your records. Like, you're not doing anything with these, get them out of the house. So I wanted to do that, and then I also wanted to challenge myself by adding an additional 100 records to that. So I sold 500, still in the process. So after selling 400 of those records, I amassed, I think, about $12,000 in sales. And I knew at that point that I was going to be able to fund my turntable without waiting for the 5th round of 100 records to sell, which, by the way, is live at this very moment on eBay. My seller handle is WCB Jazz Vinyl. I think I added in the 20 or so that hadn't sold from prior auctions, and I just lowered the starting price. So by Saturday, because they end this Saturday, I'm gonna have fulfilled my New Year's resolution of two things. One is selling 500 records on eBay, and the other is buying the turntable. So again, because I had more money than I anticipated, I decided to up my budget for the turntable. So where Luxman entered the picture is, of course, HiFi Buys, because I had been doing research, and again, I mentioned this in the last video, there's a lot of great brands that people recommended to me. At the end of the day, it was pretty compelling to be able to test the unit that I was going to get. So HiFi Buys, which by the way sells Brinkmann, Dynavector, Ortophone, Clear Audio, DS Audio, MoFi, like Rega, Project, right? Sutherland, Lyra. They have like a number of turntable brands. Those are just like the turntables that they have. And then obviously they have a ton of brands, across the gamut for all the other equipment. So I was able to demo a few different turntables, and I even borrowed a friend's Rega P3 for several weeks. And that was a P3 that had been like upgraded in a variety of ways, both in terms of, I think, platter and tone arm and certainly cartridge, right? There's a really nice cartridge on it. So I felt like I was getting a good opportunity to play the field a little bit and try to dial into what I wanted, but also talking with them about what's possible, because it turns out that in my price point, and again, for reasons I went to in my last video that I'm not going to rehash, there weren't really that many options unless I was going to start doing like essentially fully custom stuff or heavy customization on other carts, other turntables, excuse me. So where I landed was the Luxman. And again, the recommendation was that I get the two head shells so that I could swap between mono and stereo as easily as possible. And I've been listening to this setup, as I've said, for about a week. And by the way, I think I was asked this by several people in the comments last time, but they were very curious about what phono pre I got, considering that I have this turntable and considering that my last setup was a moving magnet and I didn't need that phono pre. Well, I have this is going to be in the description. I have a Parasound XRM Zphono preamp. And this is actually something that I did not buy for this turntable, by the way. I was not shopping for a new phono pre at the same time as this turntable. It's something I already had. And yes, there is a possibility that I'll be in the market for something that better matches the Luxman in the future. In fact, you could argue that maybe I should be in the market for some other equipment that better matches the Luxman. But for now, I'm perfectly happy with what I have. And we'll see how long that lasts. So let's talk a little bit more about some of the specs or the sort of characteristics of the PD-151 Mk II. So as the name suggests, this is a second iteration of the PD-151. I want to cover some of the specs, but first maybe just address the look. And again, you can see it here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to overlay a few photos so you can get a little bit closer view of what this looks like without my dim light, because I'm frequently recording these things pretty late at night. So what I would say about this turntable, at least to my eyes and certainly in the feel, is that it is gorgeous. So everything here feels really well made, from the acrylic dust cover to the tone arm to the switches. It's quite a heavy turntable too. Maybe not for those of you who are used to, I don't know, like larger platters or plinths, but it's heavier than any turntable that I've had. The unit is 18 inches wide, 15 inches deep, and 7.5 high with the dust cover. I think it's like, what is it, like probably 4.5 high or something without. So the pulley here is outside the unit. So the belt essentially is outside the unit and it's not buried underneath. The platter alone weighs 4 kilograms. And it's made from a solid billet of aluminum that they call is machined to a diamond cut finish. The total weight for this turntable, including the dust cover, is 17.2 kilograms, which is just shy of 38 pounds. So some of the features, in addition to some of the things that I mentioned that I really wanted with this, right? So like height adjustment and anti-skate and obviously tracking force adjustment, right? Is speed adjustment. So there's a dial to switch between 33, 45, and 78 RPM. So just in terms of switching between the speeds, but then each speed has its own speed adjustment to dial in to exactly what it's supposed to be. And they actually have a light indicator that illuminates, blinks, or changes color depending on whether you're where you need to be or if it needs a little bit of additional adjustment. So even though, you know, this has been, I mean, out of the box, I think it was adjusted correctly. I will be double checking it with an external speed detector, but I haven't done that yet. And then it also comes with a 45 RPM insert for singles, and it comes with some other sort of installation type of gear. But perhaps importantly, and I've heard this criticism about this turntable from others, is that it doesn't come with all of the tools that you need to set it up. And so, sort of the speculation is that, well, if you're buying one of these, you're buying it from a dealer, and the dealer's going to set it up. And guess what? That's exactly what happened in my case as well. So otherwise, and this may not be of that much interest to all of you folks because the standard edition, the PD-151, is no longer available. But there are a few differences between that standard model and this Mark II. The biggest one, as far as I can tell, is actually the tone arm. So the tone arm on this is from a company called SAEC, which stands for Sound of Audio Engineering Company, which is, that tone arm is described as a static balance type with a knife edge vertical bearing. Perhaps for those of you who are more interested and follow the developments in equipment, you'll know what that means more than I do. But this particular tone arm replaced a Gelco tone arm that came with that standard model, and Gelco, I believe, closed their doors and are no longer manufacturing tone arms. So otherwise, what this turntable comes with is, well, actually, you know what it doesn't come with is this dust cover. So this dust cover on this turntable is an $800 option. So the total price, the total retail price for the turntable with the dust cover is $6,490. I did pay something less than that. And actually, I think I got a pretty good deal. And the only reason why I don't want to get more into detail on that is because I don't have a good idea of how some of these retailers price, and especially if you're a repeat customer, and considering that I've bought this other equipment. So I don't fully, I don't feel fully comfortable saying anything more than that, other than I think I got a pretty great discount on that price. So I did not pay the $6,490. Now, of course, I also purchased two Hana, is it Hana or Hana? It's probably Hana, right? Hana cartridges, the SL Stereo and the SL Mono, plus an additional Luxman head shell so that I could have them both mounted simultaneously. So, by the way, so this is that sort of secondary head shell, and I believe, yeah, the mono cartridge is currently installed in this. And then if you look over here to the turntable that's set up, that's where the stereo one is. And so basically, really all I have to do is like unscrew what's attached to the tone arm, and I slide one off, and I put one on and screw back on. And I try as much as I can not to touch the cartridge, not to touch even like this little arm, because I don't think that would necessarily cause any movement. But I just try to be gentle with it, because again, one of my big concerns was that I was going to have to constantly be messing with the adjustments, and I really didn't want to do that. There's too many adjustments to make. If all it was tracking weight, I wouldn't have a problem with that. But I just don't like the process of having to go through the process of setting it up, find out you did it wrong, do it again. I mean, how many times? I don't know. Maybe some of you have it down to a science, but whenever I set up a new cart for the first time, it just takes me an inordinate amount of time to get it exactly how I want it to be. And so in this case, it was very helpful to have the HiFi buys set it up for me. And then, obviously after a period of time, I'm going to be double checking and making sure that everything's still where it needs to be. All right, so let's shift gears for the rest of the video. So we talked a lot about the equipment. What about the results, right? How does it all sound? What are my thoughts? So as I led with, cartridges need time to break in. How much time? I don't know. People recommend, from what I can tell, something like 20 to 30 hours. Some people may advocate for longer than that. Some people may advocate that there's a certain amount based on the cartridge. But what I can say is that the cartridges have indeed gotten better just in the time that I've been spinning. And I think it's partially the stylus and partially the cantilever that needs to, I don't know, maybe for lack of a better term, loosen up. So my initial reaction, I'm going to go through mono and stereo because kind of some different comments actually. So my initial reaction to the mono cart was, well, from listening to the very first record that I put on was a Chris Connor record. And maybe not as a surprise to some of you who follow this channel, because you all know that I love Chris Connor. But I played her self-titled album for Atlantic. Now, my copy is in great shape, and so I wanted to start with something that I knew really, really well. I also wanted to pick something with female vocals, just to see if any sort of differences jumped out at me, because you not only have the vocal element, you also have the instrumental element. And I will say that I was really wowed by how great it sounded from the get-go. If anything, on the initial spin, Chris Connor sounded fantastic, and the backing band was really just kind of blah. Now, on this particular record, the backing band isn't ever really that much. It's nothing really to marvel at. I did play around with a few other mono vocal albums that I was also really familiar with. So I picked Ella and Lewis. In fact, I used the Acoustic Sounds reissue. I also put on some old Bethlehem 10-inch stuff, including Stu Williams's Sapphire, Paula Castle's Lost Love, Conti Condoli's Sincerely Conti, and then I wanted to do a Blue Note original as well, and I went with Herbie Hancock's Inventions and Dimensions because I was really interested to hear how the drums were going to sound. Because for those of you familiar with this album, I think it's the first song that there's this really like kind of borderline jarring, sort of percussion that keeps a consistent beat, and I wanted to hear how it was going to sound. So what I heard was that much like the recordings of so many of these early albums, the primary voice, whether that's actually the vocalist or whether that's a horn player, and when I say voice, I mean voicing or their horn, they were clearly prioritized in the mix because, again, that's how they were recorded, and the backing bands weren't as great sounding. So that initial observation that I had with the Chris Connor record was consistent across the board. And I did think, actually, that I was missing something from some of these recordings, again, when I was playing these really just in the first like couple of hours after plugging this turntable in. So this exact point is exactly where breaking in the cartridge made the biggest difference. So the rest of the bands were what improved the most with time, and especially bass and drums. So before, bass wasn't really distinct, it didn't really have the resonance that I expected, and drums weren't nearly as crisp, and they were a little bit harder to hear when I first was listening to records with the mono cart. So initially, I was actually really disappointed, and I messaged my buddy who works at the shop. But then, not only did I, with a little bit of time, and he of course reminded me that these carts break in. Not only did I have clearly more crisp and distinct primary voice that again I recognized kind of up front, but and maybe even, you know what, it wasn't even just that. It wasn't even that I still had what I initially had. It did get better. And I think that where it got better was like a sense of space that separates that voicing, whether it was a vocal or a horn, from the rest of the band. Like it felt like there was like air around it, and I felt like even though it was a mono format, that there was a better sense of space around the instruments. And certainly that the bass and drums improved over time. And the end result, I think that's most surprising, even after just 1 week. And you can say, oh, you need more time. Of course I need more time to break it in. But what I can say already is that instead of mono just sounding like one dense mono block, it really does feel like it has a soundstage. And I know that that's a thing with mono records. It's just that it's more of a thing with this setup compared to my last setup. All right, so let's shift to stereo before we close this video out. So my initial reaction with the stereo cart was actually even more problematic than the mono one. So I felt that there just weren't great sonics across the board. It felt like one channel was louder than the other, inevitably the one that didn't have drums, and I wasn't really getting any of the detail that I'd expect from such a nice turntable and such a nice cartridge. So similar to what I talked about with the mono, let me tell you about some of the albums that I chose. So I reached for Grant Green's Nigeria, which is a tone poet, Hampton Hawes's 4, and actually picked the Craft Recordings reissue, even though I have an original. And then perhaps surprisingly to some of you, I chose Eddie Vedder's Ukulele Songs. among some others. There was a few other records that I was playing. Basically, I was a little nervous about pulling anything super heavy in terms of like a valuable original, just because I didn't want to risk messing anything up, and I already knew that maybe there was an issue. Like I was concerned that maybe there was like an alignment issue or like a tracking weight issue or something like that. And I didn't want to mess something up and like have the needle just like drag across the entire record. So I was picking stuff that simultaneously were not necessarily the most valuable records, maybe a little bit more modern pressings, right? Overall though, the stereo cart took more time to improve. And by the way, it probably needs to continue to improve. I'm not fully convinced it's where it needs to be yet, but to be fair, I've been playing more mono recordings over this last week than I have stereo. And so I think that the mono cart probably has had maybe 2 or 3 times the amount of time to break in compared to the stereo. So what I probably should be doing is playing some records I don't care about as much on silent, just like all day, in order to accelerate that break-in process. But the problem is I work in an office and I don't have infinite time at night to be listening to music, certainly making videos for YouTube. So at this moment, I don't have that much more commentary other than initially it was kind of troubling. It's improved quite a bit. In fact, the last record that I listened to was Ukulele Songs, and I was like, wow, this sounds really good. So I'm just really optimistic that that these carts are going to get even maybe a little bit better. And I can't wait to report back when that happens. Otherwise, and kind of in closing, so I do have a few other observations at this point to share about having gone through this upgrade process. One is that lesser quality vinyl is more exposed on this setup. And I've heard this for like years. People have been telling me this, that like the better, nicer equipment you get, the worse your records are going to sound, or at least the more that you're going to need to prioritize having like really clean, high quality records, right? So vinyl with issues, those issues are going to be more apparent. On the other hand, and maybe this goes without saying, higher quality and cleaner vinyl shines even brighter on this setup. And that's a true statement whether we're talking about modern reissues or vintage pressings. Another observation is that records that I thought were clean, especially mono records that I was previously playing with a stereo cartridge, right? Because my last setup, that's what I was doing, I've discovered may not be quite so clean. So one record on Roost, in fact, Beverly Kenny, which is always hanging out behind me, or at least lately in a lot of my videos, it sounded like, I put that on, it sounded like it either had groove wear throughout or like that it was pressed on recycled vinyl, but that was not an issue when I was playing it with a stereo cart. So what I'm planning to do is a couple of things. One is, well, I'm going to put it through my ultrasonic cleaner to see if the condition of the, like maybe the deepest part of the groove is dirty or is damaged. And otherwise, I don't know what I'm going to do, but maybe continue to play it with a stereo cart. I mean, that's a thing, right? Like I think I can continue to play mono with a stereo cart. It's just you don't want to do the opposite, I think. So anyway, we'll see. But that one really annoyed me because that's a nice record. It's like an expensive record. So we'll see how that one goes. All right, so what's next now, right? So you've heard some of my initial thoughts, and probably you may be disappointed that I don't have something more sort of explicit or direct to say. But again, I've only had this for a week, and it would be irresponsible of me to say that, you know, this is exactly how it sounds, because it continues to evolve, and I just haven't had as much time to spin. So my plan is a few things. One is I want to break these carts in more, goes without saying, and I want to start on some more review videos. So just in the time of me getting this turntable in and messing with all these auctions, which is obviously delayed, like it's really constricted my ability to make videos. And so if you look at the last, I don't know, however many weeks, it's probably been like one a week, if that. Whereas I like to make more videos because I like talking about music more than equipment. So I do have the latest Sonny Rollins 3-disc on Tone Poet. I did get Bobby Hutcherson's Total Eclipse. I got the Donald Byrd one on Transition, and guess what? I have originals of all of these to compare them to. I have a ton of other stuff that's come in over the last few months since I've been listing records. So the other thing that I'm considering is messing with the setup of this room in perhaps a really substantial way. So I'm considering getting all the equipment off the record shelves here and into a vertical rack. And I'm not happy with how that's going to mess with like the vibe of the room and the pictures on the wall, but like, shouldn't I be prioritizing sound? And I know a lot of folks have told me I need to get this off the record shelves. I need to isolate it. And I think I agree with that. I'm also getting a little bit of hum in here, and so I need to like take a look at all the cables again and figure out where that might be coming from. So anyway, some of this idea is still in its infancy, but we'll see what happens. So anyway, hopefully this was helpful for all of you who are wondering whether I was going to have buyer's remorse or just how it was starting to sound. So I'm sure that I'll be making a follow-up video, give you a little bit more over time as these cartridges are broken in. So thanks for sticking with me, and I'll see you next time.